Welcome to another deep dive.
Oh, always exciting to dive into a new topic.
Today we're going to be looking at Malcolm Gladwell's Blink,
Blink, yeah.
The Power of Thinking Without Thinking. Right. It's all about those split-second decisions.
Those blink moments.
Yeah, those blink
Those
moments.
gut feelings, the intuition.
Yeah, that we make every single day. And it shapes so much of our lives, right?
It really does, yeah. I mean, how many decisions do we actually make consciously in a day versus unconsciously?
Right.
It's fascinating to think about.
And that's exactly what we're going to unpack, right? How these snap judgments work.
Yeah.
When they're surprisingly accurate, and then, of course, when they can lead us astray.
Right.
Yeah.
Because, as Gladwell points out, it's a real art.
Yeah.
Knowing when to trust your gut.
When to pause and really think things through.
Exactly. When to go with that initial instinct and when to maybe, slow down and analyze a bit more.
Yeah, 100%. And I think there's no better place to start than with the story of the Getty Museum and their acquisition of a statue that turned out to be forgery, the Getty Koros.
Oh, yes, the Getty Koros,
Yeah.
a classic example of even experts with years and years of experience
Mm-hmm.
can be fooled by those snap judgments, especially when we're dealing with something like art authentication. It's so complex, and there are so many factors at play.
Right. So the Getty Museum was about to spend millions
Yeah.
on this ancient Greek statue, a Koros, supposedly from the 6th century BC.
Wow.
Right. And they had all the documentation.
They did their due diligence, I'm sure.
Expert opinions. Everything seemed legit.
Seems like it, yeah.
But then.
But then, there's always a but then, right?
Yeah, there's always a but then, right?
That's where the story gets interesting.
A few prominent art historians started having doubts. They couldn't immediately pinpoint why,
Interesting.
but something about the statue felt off.
They had that gist.
Yeah.
That gut feeling, like something's not right here.
Exactly. And this is where Gladwell introduces the concept of thin slicing,
Thin slicing, yeah.
which is our unconscious mind's ability to process information in an instant, picking up on subtle cues that our conscious minds often miss.
Like a mental snapshot almost.
Yeah.
Like your brain is taking in all this information, processing it super fast, and forming a judgment before you even realize it's happening.
Right. And it makes you think, how often do we have these GIS moments
Well, all the time, I bet.
in our own lives?
Probably more than we realize.
Right. Have you ever met someone new and instantly felt a good or bad vibe?
Oh, yeah, totally. You get that immediate sense about someone.
Yeah.
It's hard to explain, but it's definitely there.
Without knowing why? Or maybe you had a hunch about a business deal
Mm-hmm.
that turned out to be right.
I think those are all examples of thin slicing.
It's both amazing and a little bit unsettling.
It is, yeah. It makes you wonder about the whole nature of free will. Like, how much control do we actually have over our decisions?
Right. It's to think that so much of our decision-making is happening below the level of our conscious awareness, and Gladwell explores this further
Oh, okay. How so?
with the Iowa gambling experiment,
Okay, yeah, I've heard of that.
which demonstrates how our unconscious minds can process information
Right.
and reach conclusions much faster than our conscious minds.
It's fascinating how our unconscious minds seem to be working ahead of us, sometimes figuring things out before we consciously catch on.
Okay, so in this experiment, participants played a card game where they had to choose from different decks of cards,
Right.
some with better odds than others. What's remarkable is that people started unconsciously avoiding the bad decks
Really?
long before they consciously understood why.
So they were making the right choices without even knowing why they were making them.
Their palms were literally sweating more when they reached for the risky decks,
Wow. So their bodies were reacting before their mind.
even before they could articulate the pattern.
That's wild. So it's like their unconscious was picking up on the risk before their conscious mind even knew what was going on.
It's almost like our unconscious minds have this incredible ability to see patterns and make judgments in these complex situations without us even knowing it's happening.
I'm starting to see why this book is called Blink. We really do make these judgments in the blink of an eye.
Okay, so we've got these blink moments, these snap judgments that are often driven by our unconscious minds, but how much can we really trust these gut feelings?
Right, that's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes our gut is right on.
Yeah.
Other times, it leads us totally astray.
Are they always accurate?
Yeah.
Gladwell actually delves into this by exploring another area where thin slicing plays a crucial role:
Okay.
relationships.
Relationships. Interesting.
He highlights the work of John Gottman,
Okay.
a psychologist who can predict with remarkable accuracy whether a couple will stay together or divorce, just by analyzing a few minutes of their interaction.
Wait, really? Just a few minutes?
Yeah.
I mean, relationships are so complex. How could anyone possibly predict something like divorce based on such a short interaction?
And this is where thin slicing and those non-Googles come in, right?
Oh, I see. So he's not just listening to what they're saying, but also how they're saying it, their body language, all those subtle cues.
Exactly. Gottman isn't just listening to the words couples are saying. He's paying attention to the subtle cues in their communication, like their facial expressions, their tone of voice, even their body language.
So he's reading between the lines, looking for those hidden messages that we often send without even realizing it.
He's reading those micro expressions that betray our true feelings, even when we're trying to hide them.
It's like those little tells in poker. They give away your hand, even if you're trying to keep a straight face.
And he's found that one emotion in particular is a major red flag for relationship problems:
Okay, which one is that?
contempt.
Contempt. So like eye-rolling, sarcasm, those sorts of things.
Exactly. It's not just general negativity, right? Gottman's identified specific, subtle expressions of contempt that are incredibly powerful predictors of marital distress. And these expressions are often picked up by our unconscious minds.
Really? So we're picking up on these negative vibes even before we consciously realize what's going on.
Long before we consciously register them. So
Yeah.
even if we're not aware of it, our unconscious minds are constantly picking up on these subtle cues.
It's almost like there's this hidden radar system constantly scanning the environment.
It's these thin slices of behavior and forming judgments about the people around us.
So it's not just about big, obvious signs. It's those little, almost imperceptible cues that can tell us a lot about a person.
Especially in our closest relationships, it's like there's this locked door in our minds.
Locked door. I like that analogy.
Yeah, and behind that door, all sorts of processing is happening, shaping our perceptions and influencing our decisions.
It's like the control room for our thoughts and actions. And most of the time, we don't even have access to it.
Often without our conscious awareness. So we've got this locked door of the unconscious mind where all this thin slicing is happening.
Mm-hmm.
But how do we begin to understand what's going on behind that door?
Right. How do we crack the code?
Right. How are these snap judgments formed? Gladwell shed some light on this by introducing the concept of priming,
Priming.
which is the idea that our environment, the information we're exposed to, can unconsciously influence our thoughts and actions.
Oh, interesting. So our surroundings are actually shaping our thoughts without us even realizing it.
This is where it gets really interesting.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me about this priming thing. How does that work?
He describes a fascinating experiment
Okay.
where people were exposed to words related to old age.
Like what kind of words?
Things like Florida, bingo, wrinkles.
Oh, so stereotypical images of aging.
And then they actually walked slower down the hallway after being exposed to those words.
No way. They walked slower just from seeing those words.
Yeah. It's a powerful demonstration of how subtle cues can unconsciously prime our minds
Wow, that's pretty mind-blowing.
and shape our behavior in ways that we don't realize.
Makes you think about all the ways we might be primed without even realizing it.
Oh, 100%.
Like, could watching a certain type of movie or listening to a particular genre of music actually influence our mood and behavior?
And that's why it's so important. It can help us be more critical of the information that we're exposed to and more aware of how it might be shaping our perceptions. So we've got thin slicing, we've got this locked door of the unconscious, and now priming.
It's getting complex.
Our snap judgments seem to be influenced by a whole lot of things happening below the surface, but Gladwell also warns us about a very specific danger
Okay.
when it comes to first impressions, and it has to do with appearances.
Appearances. Okay.
It's the Warren Harding error.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that one. Tell me more.
He uses the example of President Warren Harding, who was considered a very handsome and charismatic man.
I've seen pictures. He was quite striking.
But he turned out to be one of the worst presidents in U.S. history.
Oh, wow. So appearances can be deceiving.
People were so swayed by Harding's appearance,
They were taken in by his charm.
by how presidential he looked.
Yeah.
Right. That they overlooked his lack of experience, competence, and questionable character.
So they were blinded by their initial positive impression and didn't dig deeper.
It's like people were blinded by their initial positive impression and failed to look beyond the surface. To make matters even more complex, Gladwell discusses implicit association tests, or IATs, which reveal our unconscious biases,
Oh, yeah, I've heard about those. Aren't they kind of controversial?
even those we don't consciously agree with.
Yeah, they can definitely challenge our assumptions about ourselves.
They are pretty eye-opening.
So, thinking about the Warren Harding error and these IATs, have you ever caught yourself making a snap judgment about someone based solely on their appearance?
Oh, 100%. I think we've all been there.
Yeah, I'm sure we all have.
Yeah.
It's natural to make those quick judgments. But the key is to be aware of them, to question them, and to look for more information before forming a final opinion.
I think that's a really important point. Just because we have a gut feeling, a first impression, doesn't mean we should blindly follow it.
Right. Sometimes our gut is right, but sometimes it's way off.
Sometimes we need to slow down, gather more context, and really think things through. And that brings us to another crucial factor that Gladwell highlights: the importance of context in thin slicing. He tells the story of the musician Kenna, who, despite incredible talent, struggled to gain recognition early in his career.
Why was that? Did people just not get his music?
It wasn't that simple. People were judging his music based on short snippets played over the phone or online. They were thin slicing without the proper context.
Oh, I see. So it was like trying to judge a painting by only looking at a tiny square inch of the canvas.
Right.
You might get a sense of the colors, but you'd miss the overall composition, the emotion, the story it's trying to tell.
Exactly. When people heard Kenna perform live in the right context, they were blown away.
So the context made all the difference.
Those isolated snippets just didn't do him justice. They didn't capture the full experience of his music.
So thin slicing isn't some magical power that always works perfectly.
Right.
It's more like a skill that's most effective when we have the right information and are aware of those potential biases.
Absolutely. And sometimes, as Gladwell points out, having less information can actually lead to better decisions. He tells this compelling story about a military leader, Paul Van Riper, who won a simulated war game.
A war game.
Yeah, against a technologically superior opponent by, get this, intentionally limiting information overload.
Wait, he won by knowing less. How is that even possible?
It's a counterintuitive idea.
Yeah.
But it makes sense when you think about it, right?
Okay, explain it to me.
In complex, rapidly changing environments, like a war game, or even just our daily lives, too much data can lead to analysis paralysis.
Right, too much information can be overwhelming. It's like trying to drink from a fire hose.
It can bog us down, make us overthink, and prevent us from acting decisively.
It's like that saying, he who hesitates is lost. Sometimes too much thinking can be a bad thing.
Exactly, and Van Riper understood that. He knew that in the heat of battle, trusting his gut, relying on his experience and intuition, was often the best way to make those quick, effective decisions.
So sometimes it's better to go with your gut than to overanalyze everything.
It's a powerful reminder that sometimes our unconscious minds are better equipped to handle complex situations than our conscious thought processes. But of course, the big question is, when do we trust our gut, and when do we pump the brakes and think things through?
And how can we train ourselves to make better snap judgments in the first place?
Well, I guess that's for part 2 of our deep dive.
Well, Gladwell suggests that even though these snap judgments feel so automatic, so instinctive,
Yeah.
they can actually be shaped and improved
Oh, really?
with the right kind of training
Okay.
and by creating environments that minimize the potential for bias.
So we can actually get better at making these snap judgments.
That's what he argues.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
He gives some really compelling examples.
Okay.
One is about the Miami Police Department, which was dealing with, a really serious issue of police shootings.
Right.
They decided to implement new training protocols
Okay.
that focused on de-escalation techniques and helping officers control that physiological fight or flight response.
Right.
They can impair judgment in those really high-stress situations.
And did it work?
It did. The number of police shootings significantly decreased.
Oh, wow.
It really highlights that even in those high-stakes, split-second scenarios,
Yeah.
we can train our unconscious minds to make better choices.
It shows that with the right training, we can actually rewire our brains to respond differently in those critical moments.
Right.
That's pretty amazing.
Another powerful example he gives
Okay.
is the story of how orchestras saw a dramatic increase in female musicians after they started using blind auditions.
Oh.
You familiar with that?
Yeah, I remember reading about that. The candidates would play behind a screen so the judges couldn't see them?
Right.
and could only judge them on their music.
Exactly. Not on their gender or anything else.
Not their gender.
It was a total game changer.
Hmm.
Before those screens, orchestras were overwhelmingly dominated by men.
Yeah.
But when that visual element was removed, something fascinating happened.
What happened?
The judges started choosing more women.
It's amazing.
They were finally able to focus solely on the music,
Right.
without those unconscious biases influencing their perceptions.
So if we think back to some of those other stories we've discussed, right?
Yeah.
The Getty Choros,
Hmm.
Kenna's music, the Warren Harding error.
Yeah.
Could some of those snap judgment mistakes have been avoided with different contests or better training?
That's a great question.
What do you think?
Let's see. In the case of the Getty Choros, perhaps those art historians could benefited from a more structured approach
Okay.
to analyzing the statue,
Mm.
maybe using a checklist of common red flags.
So instead of relying solely on that initial gut feeling, that gist, they could have combined their intuition with a more deliberate and systematic analysis.
Exactly.
Yeah, intro.
And with Kenna's music, imagine if those market research tests had included,
Yeah,
a wider range of listening experiences like live performances,
right.
longer samples.
Give them a chance to fully appreciate his artistry.
Exactly, which those short snippets couldn't convey.
Right.
And in the case of Warren Harding, well, perhaps if voters had delved deeper into his qualifications and policies, beyond just his charming appearance,
Yeah.
they might have made a different decision.
It's a little frightening to think about how much power those blink moments can have.
It is.
But knowing what we know now,
Mm-hmm.
are there practical steps we can take to become more aware of our biases and improve our own snap judgments?
Gladwell offers some great suggestions.
Okay.
First and foremost, he emphasizes the importance of simply being aware of our own biases.
Easier said than done, right?
It is, yeah. Our unconscious minds are like these hidden forces,
Yeah.
subtly influencing our perceptions and actions without us even realizing it.
Right.
But there are tools that can help us become more aware of those hidden biases.
Like what?
The implicit association tests that we discussed earlier are a great starting point.
Okay.
You can find them online,
Okay.
and they covered a wide range of topics like race,
Yeah.
gender, age, and even weight.
So, by taking those tests, we can gain valuable insights into our unconscious associations and prejudices, even the ones we don't consciously endorse.
Right.
Yeah.
And once we're aware of those biases, we can start challenging them.
Okay, how so?
We can actively seek out information that contradicts our preconceived notions,
Mm-hmm.
expose ourselves to diverse perspectives, and challenge our own assumptions.
It sounds like ongoing work.
It is ongoing work, but it's crucial for personal growth and for creating a more just and equitable society.
Absolutely.
Gladwell argues that understanding and addressing our unconscious biases can have a profound impact on everything,
Wow.
from hiring decisions in criminal justice to how we interact with our loved ones.
I love that quote from the book. The key to good decision-making is not knowledge, it is understanding. We can gather all the information in the world,
Right.
but if we're not aware of how our minds are processing that information, if we don't understand our own biases, we'll always be vulnerable to making those blink mistakes.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
And that understanding starts with a willingness to be honest with ourselves, to question our assumptions, to acknowledge that our instincts aren't always right,
Right.
and to be open to new information and perspectives.
So far, we've talked a lot about the pitfalls of snap judgments and
Yeah.
the dangers of unconscious bias.
Mm-hmm.
But it's important to remember that Gladwell also emphasizes the incredible strengths of our intuitive minds, right? Like, it's not all bad.
No, not at all.
Right.
He reminds us that our unconscious minds are capable of extraordinary feats of pattern recognition, intuition, and rapid decision-making.
Right.
And these abilities can be incredibly valuable, especially when we need to act quickly and decisively.
Like, in that example of the police officer who was able to assess a potentially dangerous situation in a split second and make the right call without resorting to violence.
Exactly. His years of experience and training allowed him to thin slice the situation, to notice those subtle cues that a novice would have missed, and to make a judgment that may have saved lives.
It's a great reminder that snap judgments aren't inherently good or bad.
Right.
It's all about understanding their power, their limitations, and how to use them effectively.
And most importantly, it's about recognizing that even though we might not always be aware of how our minds are working, we still have the power to shape and refine our snap judgments, to make them fairer, more accurate, and ultimately more beneficial to ourselves and the world around us.
So after this deep dive into Blink. Yeah.
I have to say, I'm looking at the world a little differently.
So.
It's like I'm suddenly more aware of all these blink moments happening around me all the time.
That's the first step, isn't it? Becoming more conscious of those mental processes, both the conscious and unconscious ones that are constantly shaping our perceptions.
And then the challenge is figuring out what to do with that awareness.
Right.
Because as Gladwell points out, sometimes our snap judgments are spot on.
Yeah.
Sometimes they lead us astray,
Mm-hmm.
and most of the time, it's somewhere in between.
It's a constant balancing act, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And it requires a certain humility to acknowledge that our first impressions can be misleading. Our instincts aren't always right.
Yeah.
And sometimes taking a pause to gather more information is the wisest course of action.
And it's not easy to face those unconscious biases that can sneak into our judgments, even when we think we're being completely objective.
Right.
Those IATs were a real wake-up call for me.
They are eye-opening, aren't they?
They remind us that we all have these biases, and they can be about anything. Age, weight, height, even something as seemingly superficial as hair.
It's true.
You know, now that you mention it, I'm remembering that story you told about being stopped by the police because of your hair.
Oh, yeah. That was a rather absurd encounter.
Yeah.
But it really brought home how quickly our minds form associations and how easily those associations can lead to unfair judgments.
Absolutely.
It's a good reminder to be mindful of our own biases and to challenge those initial impressions whenever possible.
But that doesn't mean we should constantly second-guess ourselves or overanalyze every thought and feeling.
Right.
Our snap judgments are part of what makes us human.
Yeah.
They allow us to navigate the world, connect with others, and make those quick decisions that are often necessary in our daily lives.
So how do we find that sweet spot, that balance between trusting our intuition and knowing when to question it?
That's a great question, and I think it's something we're all continually working on. But Gladwell offers some valuable guidance through the examples he shares.
Okay.
Remember the Aran chair?
Yeah.
It initially failed in market research simply because it looked so different from traditional chairs.
Right.
People just weren't used to it.
The power of familiarity.
Exactly.
Our minds tend to gravitate toward what we know.
What feels safe and comfortable.
You feel safe and comfortable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We can be resistant to things that challenge our expectations, even if those things might ultimately be better for us or offer innovative solutions.
It's a good reminder to be open to new experiences and to avoid dismissing something just because it seems unfamiliar or goes against our preconceived notions. So if we were to sum up all of this into a few key takeaways for our listener today, what would they be?
I think that's a great idea. Let's distill what we've learned from Blink. Well, we've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
It seems like the first key takeaway is that thin slicing is a real phenomenon.
Yeah, it's not just some made-up concept.
Our unconscious minds are incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
Capable of making these rapid-fire judgments based on these tiny bits of information.
But we also have to remember that those judgments are always influenced by context.
Right.
And of course, our own unconscious biases.
Absolutely. Context is key. And being aware of our biases is crucial if we want to make fairer, more accurate judgments.
Another big takeaway for me is that sometimes less is more when it comes to information.
Oh, interesting.
Overthinking and getting bogged down in data can actually lead to worse decisions than trusting our gut instincts in certain situations.
That's a great point. Gladwell's example of Paul Van Riper winning that war game by intentionally limiting information overload is a powerful illustration of that principle.
Right.
Sometimes a well-honed intuition can be more effective than endless analysis.
It's like that old saying, don't overthink it. Sometimes our unconscious minds are better equipped to handle those complex situations than our conscious analytical minds.
And finally, and perhaps most importantly, Gladwell shows us that we can actually train our snap judgments.
Oh, really?
We can improve our intuition and become better at making those split-second decisions.
I like that.
Through practice awareness and creating environments that minimize bias, we can actually make our blink moments work for us, not against us.
So it's not like we're just stuck with whatever snap judgments our brains happen to make.
Right.
We can actually learn and grow and become better at this.
Absolutely. It's about refining that delicate balance between intuition and deliberation.
Yeah.
Knowing when to trust our gut and when to pause and gather more information.
And it's about recognizing that even though we might not always be fully aware of how our minds work,
Right.
we can still take steps to make our snap judgments fairer, more accurate, and ultimately more beneficial to ourselves and the people around us.
Well said.
This deep dive into Blink has been a real eye-opener for me.
Yeah, me too.
It's made me more aware of all those Blink moments happening in my own life and more conscious of the subtle influences that shape my perceptions.
That increased awareness is the first step.
Right.
And then the real journey begins. The ongoing work of understanding our own minds, questioning our assumptions, and refining those intuitive judgments that play such a significant role in our lives.
Gladwell challenges us to pay attention to those Blink moments, to be mindful of those forces at play, and to recognize that within those seemingly fleeting instants of judgment lie incredible insights into the workings of our own minds and the complexities of the human experience.
So to our listener, the next time you find yourself in a blink moment,
Yeah.
take a pause, even just for a second,
Yeah.
and consider what might be happening beneath the surface.
What's driving that gut feeling, that immediate reaction?
You might be surprised by what you discover.
Remember, those snap judgments, those flashes of intuition are not just random occurrences.
They're powerful glimpses into the intricate workings of your unconscious mind.
A mind that is constantly processing information, making connections, and shaping your perceptions of the world.
The more we understand those processes, the better equipped we'll be to navigate the complexities of life and make choices that are both wise and just.
It's been a fascinating exploration of Blink.
It has.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive